For many of us, it is the most important commitment to take care of our loved ones. We feed, as the Beatles song goes, and we work hard to ensure that those close to us are thriving. Today, there are 53 million people taking care of their parents, neighbors, and friends. And there are 53 million stories. From the Stanford Center on Longevity, this is When I'm 64, the podcast for caregivers. I'm your host, Ken Stern. We often think of older adults as care recipients, but there's a community in which that script is flipped. For many parents of children with IDD or intellectual and developmental disabilities, they act as caregivers not only when their children are young, but also when their children are adults. Today we hear from Paula Gann in California, mother of 3 and caregiver to her daughter Kyle. Soon after Kyle was born, she was diagnosed with Down syndrome. And just a few years ago, in her 40s, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's as well.
Kyle, our middle child, was born with Down syndrome. And I was 28 at the time that I had her, which is pretty unusual because most children with Down syndrome are born to mothers later in life. So I am now 77, and Kyle is now 48. The day after she was born, they came in and the 2 doctors, and I think one was teaching the other how to deliver this news. They came in and they told my husband and I that they suspected she had Down syndrome. You know, I did the same thing then that I did when I heard she had Alzheimer's disease. I put my head down and tried to learn everything I could about what was going on. It's kind of my way of processing grief, I guess, is that I study. I try to do whatever I can. So we knew, and at that point, I began advocating for her. I would not go out and kick ass for me the way I did for Kyle. We treated her just like our other kids, and her brothers didn't cut her any slack. Clint and I had talked about it, and we really felt that the best thing that we could do for her was the best future for her would be to live as normal a life as possible and to be in the community. So she had a very rich life. In high school, she wanted to go to the prom. She went to Jenny Craig, lost a bunch of weight, got a prom dress, went to the prom with her boyfriend at the time. So she had all of those experiences. She went on to junior college. Really, the struggle was not so much with Kyle, it was with the system. So Kyle currently is living in her own apartment. There was a new apartment complex being built in Santa Clara, and there had to be, I think it was 90 set-asides for people with intellectual disabilities. That was a part of the agreement that the city made. And there was a lottery, and Kyle got a 2-bedroom apartment. And that was 20 years ago, and she is still in that apartment. And I really felt she was in her own apartment. She was in a program she liked. She was happy. I'm done. I've done my work. I can retire. I'm going to go to the Mendocino Coast and retire, And then this diagnosis happened, and it was like, oh, my God. The way I found out that Kyle had Alzheimer's, she had been depressed, and she had good reason. So anyway, I wanted her to see a psychiatrist that maybe she needed meds or something. And when she went to see him, he called me that afternoon and told me that she had Alzheimer's disease. I did not know about the co-occurrence of Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease, but I have since learned that it's the population that is impacted more than any other population with Alzheimer's disease. I considered myself pretty informed about Down syndrome. I mean, I had been working in the community advocating for Kyle from the time she was born, and I had never heard about that. So the not knowing is a problem for parents. And the diagnosis is a problem because this psychiatrist had never seen Kyle before. Alzheimer's disease is difficult to diagnose, and he essentially saw her one time, and I don't know how long the appointment was, 15, 20 minutes, and diagnosed her with Alzheimer's disease. So the one problem is like with Kyle's psychiatrist, where he jumps to a diagnosis. The other problem is oftentimes you come in and you say, "Oh, my daughter she's kind of repeating herself. She's doing," and the doctor says, "Oh, well, she has Down syndrome. What do you expect?" So either it's attributed to the Down syndrome and not pursued, or they jump at a conclusion. When I got this phone call, I was devastated. I mean, I kind of feel, and I still feel, Kyle has worked so hard to get where she is in the world, and it is so unfair that now she's having to deal with this. It's just, it makes me very sad that that's what's going on now. When you have a kid with special needs, you reach the point where you know more than the doctor does about them. And it's one of the problems is that often, as I said, I'm 77, and I had Kyle when I was 28. If I had been 38, I would be 87 now trying to deal with this. So parents oftentimes are dealing with their own decline, and trying to then somehow deal with an adult child that is going through Alzheimer's is really difficult. And so many times it ends up being the siblings that are taking care of the adult with Down syndrome and Alzheimer's. And they haven't had that 40 years of advocacy, or however long it is, where you cut your teeth on that and you learn what to do and how to do it. So, and they've got their own jobs, they've got their own families, so it's a very, very difficult situation. One of the things I've been working really hard on is to try to get a dementia-capable home developed in the Bay Area. And it's been an uphill battle because the state of California has really not begun to deal with aging in the population of the intellectually disabled. They didn't get old, they died. So now they are getting old, and nobody's doing anything about it. I feel confident that that ultimately Kyle will be okay. But I would really, really be happy if I knew that she was in a place where people knew how to handle her disease. I want her to have what we all want, a quality of life.
We just heard from Paula Gann, who is a caregiver to her daughter Kyle, who has Down syndrome, an intellectual and developmental disability. But that term includes more than just Down syndrome. Some forms of autism, most fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, and many rare genetic conditions also fall under that category. Today we're talking to Kristin Rains, an Independent Dementia Care Trainer in San Francisco, and Shawn Ullman, Senior Director of National Initiatives at the ARC, to help us understand the challenges faced by caregivers like Paula. Shawn, let me start with you. Tell us, what is the ARC?
Thanks, Ken. So the ARC is a national organization that has been around since the 1950s as an advocacy and service provider for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, which includes individuals with Down syndrome. And I work in our Center for Future Planning, which was created sort of specifically to talk about some of the things that we're talking about today, and that Paula was raising as concerns with you. We created the center in 2014 because research was showing that there was around 1 million people with IDD living with caregivers over the age of 65, and fewer than a quarter of them had any plans for what was going to happen if their caregiver should no longer be available to take care of them, whether that was because they passed away or had their own health issues. And so the center's goal is to provide training and easy to understand videos and resources for people and their family members, as well as the professionals who support them, to start thinking about the future and what the future looks like, and to put down in writing and then share with everybody who needs to know what those wishes are and how day-to-day needs are currently met, and what the person and their family want to happen if there is a change in caregivers in the future, or if there is a move to a new home needed, or if there is a change in someone's independent living skills, or if there's a change in someone's decision-making abilities, so that there's information there at the ready. And of course, any major change in a person's life is always going to be problematic, but that hopefully there are some at least ideas and notions written down that everybody knows and is on the same page about, so the transition can maybe be a little bit easier. So that's the center and what we do.
Kristin, your work with caregivers of people with IDD and dementia is a bit different. It's quite hands-on. Tell us about what you do.
I'm a dementia care trainer, and my job is focused on supporting family caregivers as well as paid givers in working with folks that are developing dementia, that are having brain changes. I really try to help people understand what's going on in the brain in a general sense that's changing, and how can we focus on what's left and support what is going away. So we go into a lot of training about understanding that these changes are not just a memory problem. These are throughout the entire brain. It's affecting all of our senses and all of our ability to process information. And one of the biggest challenges is really just being able to identify which of our clients, our consumers, individuals are actually going through some changes, because it's something that we've never seen before. In the past, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities didn't live until their older years. So the fact that we're starting to see folks that are aging, which is a good thing, we're also starting to see some of the diseases along with aging, including dementia. And so there's a lot of work to be done in our community in preparing people for what's to come.
I'm curious about what advice you have for caregivers, especially older caregivers who are having their own maybe physical or decline challenges. How do you advise them to take care of themselves so they can, for their own sake and for the sake of their families?
Oh, it's so important. I have seen this so often that the caregivers, they've worked so hard to get their loved one to a place where they're independent. And they're finally, maybe after 30 years, taking their first breath, like, okay, yeah, we're all set. And then they start to see decline. And it can be heartbreaking. So I really encourage them to join a support group. And think about how they're going to maintain their own health. So getting paid caregivers in, working with the regional center staff to make sure they've got enough support. The other idea that I encourage people to do is to reach beyond our silo of IDD services and look at services for the general population. So, can they join an adult day health program? Because there's not a lot of services for our aging community, for individuals specifically with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So sometimes we need to reach beyond and look at the resources that are out there for the general community, and how can we access those to better support our individuals. And I've had great success with that.
So, Shawn, let me ask you, what kind of resources are there to support that caregiver in, what we can all acknowledge as could be a very difficult, if loving, journey?
Yeah, I think there aren't enough resources for those caregivers. Trying to make sure they're connected to folks like Kristin and to other caregivers in similar situation, and that they feel like they have support, and from people who may understand what they're going through are, some of the most important resources that community-based organizations like ours and the National Down Syndrome Society can be providing to the older caregivers. what we're hoping in the center is to try to reach those families sooner in this journey. We've had a couple of pilots where we're in the middle of one right now, where we're trying to create some training resources specifically for people with Down syndrome to talk about the increased risks they specifically have when they age. In addition to dementia, I mean, the statistics are something like 30 to 40% of people with Down syndrome are likely to have dementia by the time they reach the age of 50, which when you compare to the non-disabled community is, stark. That's very high. And I don't think people have been telling families that. And they also haven't been telling the people themselves that. So our goal is to try to create education and resources so that's not such a surprise when they go into the doctor's office.
You mentioned the significantly increased risk of dementia for people with Down syndrome. Let me ask you both. Are the care challenges we're talking about today unique to Down syndrome, or do caregivers of people with other intellectual and developmental disabilities face these same issues?
The science generally assumes at this point that the broader category of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are going to experience symptoms of dementia at about the same rate as the general population, so about 1 in 10. So it's not just folks with Down syndrome who are going to be experiencing dementia, but it's all of our community. In addition to that, our community, by definition, lacks what they might call the, quote, cognitive reserve to overcome some of the symptoms, especially the early symptoms of dementia. So what we are seeing in our community is usually a shorter trajectory. So maybe rather than the general 8 to 10 years that the general community sees someone with Alzheimer's, it might be more like 2 to 5 years. So it's going to hit harder and faster due to that lack of cognitive reserve, or the ability to sort of use other parts of your brain to compensate for the parts of the brain that are dying because of the disease. The other thing is, I don't think we have any idea about what to do with folks with autism. I think that's our next big wave that's coming, because these are individuals whose brains are already challenged in a variety of ways. So adding dementia on top of autism is going to be a huge challenge that I believe we're not prepared for at this point.
And I would just add that I think the challenges that aging caregivers of people with Down syndrome face are the same challenges that all aging caregivers of people with disabilities face, if they have been the primary caregiver. So if it's a person with a mental illness, if it's a person with, maybe quadriplegia who requires a lot of support, someone, obviously with intellectual and developmental disabilities beyond Down syndrome, anyone who requires long-term, what we call long-term services and supports. So it's not just I was in an accident and I need short-term services until I can take care of myself again, but this is someone who needs some sort of moderate to significant level of care throughout their entire life. Their primary caregivers all face a challenge of needing to be ready for a time when they're no longer available. And all of them need to think about it as soon as possible, write it down as soon as possible, tell all of the important players, the case managers, the doctors, the family members, whoever it is that needs to know, tell them about the plan so everybody knows the plan, and then review and change the plan as the person grows and learns more or has less capabilities, right? As we get older, we learn more and we know more things, but then our bodies can do less than they used to be able to do. And that's not different for people with disabilities. The same thing happens. They grow and learn and have more experiences and can do more things, but their bodies start to give up too. So I do think it is broader than just people with Down syndrome and even people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their caregivers.
I do think that there's also some strengths that our community could share with the general community, and that is that our caregivers already know that you just need to start with where the person is at, right? Because all of our individuals have their own unique level of abilities, and we have learned to accept that person. Okay, well, this is what Mary can do, and and we're going to accept those limitations and work within that. And John can do something different, and we're going to support him in maybe going off to work, because John can function at that level. And so we get that already, right? Whereas, if you're thinking about your husband, you know you assume a level of competency that you want to hang on to. And we understand that people are different, right? So it's just taking that understanding that everyone comes in with their own unique level of skills, and recognizing that those are going to be changing over time.
So let me ask you this, Shawn. Forewarned is forearmed, or maybe it's the other way around. But what do you do knowing what do you do with that knowledge? And if you know your adult child has a hugely increased risk of dementia, how do you prepare for that? How can a caregiver prepare for such a challenging future?
One thing that we want is, again, forewarned and before you're in the middle of it, is to think about and have the person think about what it is that may happen and how they may be impacted, and then communicate early how they want to be informed, how they want to be involved, who they want to get supports from, and the kinds of supports they'd like to get. I think an additional challenge that we haven't quite figured out how to address yet is healthcare providers and them recognizing it and diagnosing it soon enough. And so that's something that I think the medical community has to work on. In addition to dementia, hearing and vision loss is a significant problem as adults with Down syndrome age. They're also at increased risk of leukemia, and understanding chemotherapy and treatments for that can be very challenging. So helping them understand what that means, and if that were to happen to them, what would they want to happen? As well as people with Down syndrome have a lot more heart issues than people with other disabilities and then the general population. So it's talking to people with Down syndrome about these risks in a way they can actually understand, and then allowing them the opportunity before it ever happens to share with their loved ones and their maybe paid providers and agency caseworkers what it is that they want to happen. And then for family members, I think the same kinds of supports and information that are out there for any family member who has a loved one with dementia. Unfortunately, they may be a lot younger than most people with dementia, so you may not be expecting it, but the same kinds of resources are valuable to caregivers of people with IDD as well.
Kristin, what have you seen? And I'll ask you the same question, Shawn. What have you seen in terms of society's ability to appropriately handle this new population?
The system is really not designed for people to age in place. It was really I love the regional centers. It's an amazing service that we have here in California, but it was really designed to help people constantly improve their independence. And the truth is, as we age, we become more dependent, and especially if we are dealing with a brain change like dementia, there's going to be a need for more and more care. And yet the care homes that we have developed in California are based on one level of service. And what ends up happening is that people, as they need higher levels of care, are being moved from one home to another to another. And often each change means that who that person is lost along the way until they're in their final days. They're being cared for people who know nothing about them. What are their likes? What are their wishes for their end of life? So much information about who they are as an individual is lost along the way. And that's really tragic.
I think there are pockets of things happening in places where providers or state agencies are being creative in providing services and supports to people, but most systems are set up similar to how Kristin described California's, where the state agency has sort of a system in place for people to go to a home where they have direct support staff, and when that person's needs change, the answer is to send them to a different home. So I do think that experience is largely consistent across the country, but I do think there are people who are thinking about, I think we're in the middle of thinking about how maybe we could do this different and better, but I don't think we're there yet.
So I've learned from you and learned from Paula, and I hope our listeners have learned as well about both the great advances that allow this population to live longer and perhaps more healthily, but maybe that society hasn't been ready for that change. So I'm going to put you each in an elevator with either President Biden or Governor Newsom. Pick whoever you want to be in an elevator with. What would you say to them about what civil society as a whole needs to do to better support both caregivers or older adults with Down syndrome and Alzheimer's and the like? Well, you're shaking your head, Shawn. So I'm going to start with you, Kristin.
I mean, one thing in an elevator, man.
Well, it could be a long elevator ride. Take your time. What needs to change in order to get us where we need to be to really help families?
Well, if I had Gavin Newsom in an elevator and I could ask for one thing, I would ask that we start building homes that are able to care for people um, throughout the disease process so that people don't have to move from home to home. So there's a few care homes that are being developed for individuals with IDD and dementia. There's one in San Diego, there's a couple others around the country, but certainly nowhere near enough. So I would love to see us be able to adapt the care system, the care home system, to let people age in place rather than having to move.
All right, Shawn, I've delayed your elevator ride for as long as I can. What do you say?
I mean, gosh, I wish one of our policy people were here to answer that question. I think they'd do a better job. But what I think I would say is that we wrote the sort of federal laws that create these systems of services and supports for people with disabilities a long time ago, and we haven't changed them to reflect some of the current understandings about people's abilities. They're still very deficit, what they can't do, and protective, how we need to keep them from things in the world focused. And if we could sort of flip that on its head so that the laws and policies and monies made it easier for people and their families to get the services and supports they need in their own homes, in their own communities, and not need to go into facilities in the first place, to truly sort of age in place and get what they need in whatever setting in the community they want to be in. I think that could really make things smoother.
I think both the governor and the president would be advantaged if they had those elevator rides. Thank you both very much. You can find resources and documents from the ARC to help plan for the future at futureplanning.thearc.org. And if you have further questions for Kristin Rains, you can reach out to her directly at kristinjrains@gmail.com. Thanks to Kristin Rains, Shawn Ullman, Paula Gann, and all those in the community who share their knowledge and stories with us. Carrie Thompson and Ava Ahmedbegi are the producers of When I'm 64. Please like us on iTunes and leave us a review. You can find out more about us by checking out our website, longevity.stanford.edu. You've been listening to When I'm 64, the podcast for caregivers. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Ken Stern.